Hey, Frank and Arlo. Grandpop in the van again in front of my physical therapy. I got great news today. I'm able to go out jogging a little bit starting today, and if there's no pain, I'll be able to continue to go. I'm only allowed to jog for 20 seconds, and then I have to walk for 1 minute and 40 seconds. I have an app on my watch that I can set to do that, so that's all good. I'm allowed to do it on the beach, they said, if I can find flat, hard sand, which I can. So I'm pretty happy today. But I'm not here to tell you about that. I'm here to do video number 3 from the Building and Using a Fascinating Vocabulary video series. And this video is on not so civil discourse. The first video we did was on keeping a commonplace book, so you have some place to store and review and regurgitate the words that you're learning, the fascinating vocabulary. And then in the second video, we looked at the kind of vocabulary that you need in civil discourse, some words that you need to understand general topics. One thing that I talked about is that normally you want to be able to have a civil conversation with somebody, even if they believe something that's 180 degrees from what you believe. And the first thing I talked about was making sure that people understand you. The biggest faux pas in discourse is that you say things to people to show how much you know, but they don't know what you're talking about, so you don't want to do that. And then we talked about some words that you need to know what's going on in the world every day. Then the third thing we looked at was language at work and play. You want to be very familiar with the vocabulary for whatever courses you're taking in school, whatever vocation you have, your work. You want to know the vocabulary. You want to know what all those words mean. You want to be able to converse about those things, your hobbies, things like the Bible. There's a whole bunch of words that you learn when you're studying the Bible. And maybe later I'll do one on that. I'm not planning on doing it during this series, but maybe I'll do a whole series of the verbiage necessary to really discuss the Bible in detail with somebody. Next, we talked about fascinating words with a story. Words that you can use to paint a beautiful picture by using the word and then given the background of the word. And they were words that sounded amazing all on their own, but then when you knew where those words came from, it was a complete picture. It was like you painted a complete picture. Next, we looked at powerful words, words that just by the sound of them make your statement more powerful. And then sixth and lastly, we discussed how to acquire a fascinating vocabulary. Once again, in this one, I used dictionary.com and the Online Etymology Dictionary to do my research. Now, in this one, we're going to talk about not so civil discourse. This is when you need to get up in somebody's face. In the first one, I said you don't want to come off like a sanctimonious a-hole. You want people to understand you, not to say, oh, wow, this guy he knows so many fascinating words, but I don't know what they mean. sometimes you do want to sound like you're smarter than the person. You do want to get up in their face and go, I'm better than you. Not a lot, but occasionally. There's going to be two parts today. The first is words that you use to describe your adversary. And second are words that you use to describe your adversary's actions. So first, describing your adversary. There's some great words. One is the word feckless. It just sounds like you're feckless. Well, what does it mean? It means ineffective, incompetent, futile. It means having no sense of responsibility, being indifferent, lazy. You're just feckless, you're lazy. It's a Scottish word that's shortened from effectless. Scottish is related to English in a lot of ways. The next word is mountebank. So what, you might ask, is a mountebank? Well, he's a quack who sells nostrums at fairs, etc. So back in earlier days in the United States, and it still happens in a certain way today, but just a little differently, people lived in these little rural towns, and traveling salesmen would go around and come to the town and get up on a bench or a box or something. So a mountebank means get on a bench. They would get up usually in the local marketplace on a bench and sell what's called snake oil. Oh, if you put this oil on, it'll get rid of your arthritis. If you put it on your chest, it'll get rid of your cold. You know, this cures pneumonia. This cures hay fever, whatever. And it was just some random things put together, made to smell a certain way. So it smelled like medicine, quote unquote. And then the guy was gone. So by the time you tried it out, that dude was at the next town. So there were these mountebanks going all over the country selling crap to people. The next word is sophist. And all these words will be in the section below this video on YouTube before the comments. And I'm putting them all together, so they're going to be cumulative. The ones from the first video, second video will be in there, and then these will all be in there in alphabetical order. So the next word is sophist. A sophist is one who makes use of fallacious arguments. So somebody who argues things, but they don't use facts. They use made-up things, made-up facts. So there were these guys called Greek Sophistes. And originally it meant that they had knowledge. But it came to mean over time, one who gives intellectual instruction for pay. So they were like professors. Right? And there's a lot of professors that are sophists now. They won't admit it, but there are a lot. But that's a subject for another day. In Athens, the term sophist would be contrasted with the term philosopher, lover of knowledge, which has soph in it, philosopher. And it became a term of contempt. If you call somebody a sophist, you're saying They're kind of like a mountebank, but not selling a product. They're selling an idea. The next word is a gadfly. And this is a real fly. These are flies that bite cattle. And they think that the way they got the part of the word gad was from a goad, a metal rod, which in the sense of a fly is a stinger. So it's saying it's a stinger, but it's more like a cattle prod. And some cattle prods actually have electricity that come out of them and they shock people. But this is a term that was way before electric cattle prods. And they would rove about, buzz around these cattle. And so it turned into a term that meant a person who would roam about, often stopping here and there to irritate people. And Plato, in talking about Socrates, said that he was a gadfly. And that's why they put him to death in ancient Athens. The next one is one of my favorites. It's a lick spittle. You're a lick spittle. It's a contemptible, fawning person, a servile flatterer, or a toady. Just listening to the word coming out of somebody's mouth, if it's directed at you, makes you go like, I don't lick spit, but it's kind of like that you would lick the ground in front of somebody just to please them. Fawning. Fawning means like, oh, you're so wonderful. There's another word that's closely related to that, and it's a sycophant. A self-seeking, servile flatterer. A fawning parasite. You can see why these words are all lumped into this thing on Not So Civil Discourse. Here's another one of my favorites. Unctuous. It just sounds like that somebody's unctuous. It means greasy or oily. Literally. Like somebody's greasy, they're oily. But it doesn't mean that they have oily skin or greasy skin. It means that they're characterized by excessive piousness. You know, being high and mighty. Or moralistic fervor, like I'm better than you. I'm right about everything. Especially in an affected manner. Excessively smooth, suave, or smug. Of the nature of or characteristic of an unguent or an ointment. Like, you know, something that you spread on, and it's like, I hate when your grandmother makes me use anything that's like a lotion or anything. I don't like to have that on my skin. I just can't wait to go wash it off. It's unctuous. Greasy, man. Trailer Park Boys. That's one of the terms they use, that if something's not on the up and up, it's greasy. The next word is Procrusting. Not to be mixed up with the one from the last one, Protean. This Procrusting, in a figurative sense, means violently making conformable to standard, producing uniformity by deforming force or mutilation. So it's like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole kind of thing. trying to make something fit where it doesn't fit, forcing things. And people do that in arguments all the time. And you can say, you're presenting a Procrusting's bed. So this comes from this guy. He was a robber in a mythical place, or he was a mythical robber in an actual place called Attica. And what he would do is he would seize travelers, and he would take them to his place, and he would tie them to his bed. If they were too short to fill the bed, he would put them on this machine and stretch them until they were long enough to fit. And if they were too long to fit on the bed, he would start chopping off parts of their limbs to make them fit in there. And so that's what it means, that you're willing to do anything to make your argument fit. You're Procrustian. Another interesting one is Luddite. Now, Luddites don't like technology, but they're not people. Sometimes I think I'm a Luddite because I get frustrated with technology and I go, I hate this. It was just simpler when we used paper and pen. But a Luddite fears technology, and they actually want to destroy it. So in the 19th century, the early 1800s, there were bands of workers in England known as Luddites, and they organized to destroy manufacturing machinery under the belief that its use diminished employment. It goes on all the time. You know, we used to pay a toll taker at a toll bridge to go across the bridge. Now they have these machines that take a picture of your license plate and then it bills you. And you have an account set up and it just takes the money out of there. It's much quicker to get through the bridge. But the toll takers resisted that. They were Luddites. They rightfully realized that they'd be out of a job at some point in time down the line as these things were rolled out. But they wanted to destroy it, which would affect all of us. People used to be stopped at a bridge for 20 minutes trying to get through because, if a couple toll takers called in sick, it would back up. They'd only have one or two toll booths open. And so you have to look at what's good for everybody, not just the few individual workers that are involved. So now it's anybody who is opposed or resistant to new technologies or technological change. And then by the 1960s, as computers started to become part of our life, it was anybody who resisted things like computers, any kind of new technology. So that's the things to describe your adversary. Next, we're going to look at things to describe the actions of that adversary. The first one is cajole, to deceive or delude by flattery. And it may have originated from a French word for trapping of birds, so trapping them in a cage, cajole. Cage evolved into cage. Now, how do you cajole somebody? Through the next word, machinations, a plotting, a conspiracy, an intrigue. There's another way. You can hoodwink them. That goes all the way back to the 1560s. It means to blindfold. Literally, to blindfold. To blind by covering the eyes. But you're doing it in a figurative sense. So, you're hoodwinking me. You're trying to pull the wool over my eyes is another way that you say it. Here's another one, to wheedle. Wheedle means to endeavor to influence a person by smooth, flattering, or beguiling words or acts. So these adversaries, you're going to say, yeah, you know what? You're making bad arguments and you're trying to get me to believe something that I shouldn't believe. You're cajoling me, using machinations. You're hoodwinking me. You're wheedling me. You're using the next word, skullduggery. Skullduggery has nothing to do with digging up skulls, although it sounds like that. It means dishonorable proceedings, mean dishonesty, or trickery. The next word is treacle. And treacle is contrived or unrestrained sentimentality. It comes from an Old English word for molasses. And people will say, like, oh, you're pouring it on as thick as molasses. Pouring on that treacle. The next word is dogmatic. You'll hear this word a lot. It means asserting opinions in a doctrinaire or arrogant manner. But quite simply, it means being opinionated. That you've decided that the world is this way, and no matter what evidence you hear, your dogma is going to prevail, and you're going to say, no, I don't care what you tell me, this is the way that it is. The next word is truckle. Truckle means to submit or yield obsequiously or tamely. The next one is braggadocio. Braggadocio, if you use braggadocio, you're using empty boasting, bragging. It can be used to describe a person. A person's a braggadocio if they're boasting, if they're a braggart. The next word is bravado. Pretentious, swaggering display of courage. The next one is from Yiddish, and we're going to have a whole section of things in another video on foreign words, but this one I had to put in here. And that's chutzpah. Chutzpah is informal, shameless audacity, impudence. The next one is a really cool word. It's claptrap. Claptrap means pretentious but insincere or empty language. Also, any artifice or expedient for winning applause or impressing the public. So it's a trick to get applause. So it's a stage term, but it's also a term in just everyday rhetoric where you can say, oh, that was just claptrap. It was empty language. But quite often when people use claptrap, they use it in front of a specific audience. And the audience, it's like feeding them raw meat and they go, yay. Certain politicians do that all the time. As a matter of fact, most politicians do that an awful lot. Another word is pontificate. To speak in a pompous or dogmatic manner. To look down on people. To be a know-it-all is to pontificate. When you know everything, nobody can tell you anything, then you pontificate or bloviate. Hackneyed. That means made commonplace or trite, stale or banal, which banal is related to those words, and we're going to have that in a second. Trite means lacking in freshness or effectiveness because of constant use or excessive repetition. So if you use something all the time, It's a hackneyed phrase. It's trite because it's stale. It loses its power over time. Banal. Banal means devoid of freshness or originality. So it's related to these other words, hackneyed and trite, and you can substitute a lot of these words for each other. If you're a really, really good English scholar, you'll know the fine differences between them. But what will you be? A sanctimonious a-hole. And you don't want to do that. Usually. The next word is bromide. And that's a platitude or trite saying. So we're still in that same area. A bromide can also describe a person who is platitudinous and boring. Now here's somebody who's usually not boring. They're bumptious. Bumptious means offensively self-assertive. They're like, just, I gotta get my foot in the door. With bombast. Bombast means that you're using speech that is too pompous for an occasion. Using pretentious words. It's being a sanctimonious a-hole. Hey, Mr. Bombasto. You're a bombastard. Yeah, just coined the phrase. And it was also used, bombast was used as stuffing for pillows. And I remember my grandmother, who was born in the 1800s, the late 1800s, she used to say she was putting bombast in pillows. She would make pillows. She was quite the seamstress. The next speech is hubris. It's a Greek word. It means excessive pride or self-confidence to the level of arrogance. In Greek mythology, a couple examples of hubris come to mind. You have Icarus, who he was trapped someplace with his father, deadless. I forget where. I should have written it down here. And the father made wings out of wax and said, hey, we can flap the wings and we can fly, but don't get too close to the sun. The sun, S-U-N, and the sun, S-O-N. Icarus started flying, and he's like, hey, look at me, I can fly higher and higher. And they thought that the sun was closer than it was. And the wings melted, and he fell and died. And the next was Odysseus, who was sort of a trickster during the Odyssey, when they were coming back from fighting the Trojan War and trying to get, and Odysseus was trying to get home. It took him 20 years. And one reason was because he would do things out of hubris, because he thought that he was very smart, and he was, but he wasn't quite as smart as he thought he was. Now here's something that you need to know, the difference between specious and spurious. Specious means apparently good or right though lacking real merit. Superficially pleasing or plausible. So you have specious arguments. It also means pleasing to the eye but deceptive. And spurious is not genuine, authentic, or true, not from the claimed, pretended, or proper source, counterfeit. So there's a subtle difference, but there is a difference. Specious, lacking real merit, although it appears to be correct. Spurious, on the surface, is not true. You can see through spurious. It's easy for me to say spurious. But you might not be able to see through specious right away. So a specious argument is a little more difficult to see the fault than a spurious one. So recapping, there were 2 parts today. We looked at first describing your adversary and then describing your adversary's actions. Now be careful. If you take these words that I gave you today and you start dropping them into conversations, accusing people of things, you might wind up really needing to know some of the words in the next video, video 4, which is them's fighting words. Until then, guys, peace out.